Recently I created a video where I colored in this artwork using $0 pencils that I got for free from a cafe. Now, that was fun and it was an interesting challenge, but it got me thinking, I wonder what that piece would look like if it was reproduced using 20 Swiss art pencils valued at $80.
Just like they do on BuzzFeed.
G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza, and today I'm going to be directly comparing these crappy $0 pencils against these Swiss art pencils I bought from an art store in Paris, France, when I was over there on holiday with my family in the middle of last year. These cheap ones were of course thrown to us with a colouring piece of paper for my son to have a play with, while on the other hand I carefully chose these coloured pencils while testing them against a whole bunch of different brands, and I picked the one that I really liked how they showed and how they felt to use. It was a bit of an extravagant purchase, I'll admit, but I was on holiday in Paris. I had just been to the Louvre. I was excited and inspired, and I had a little bit of spending money. So this is what I ended up with as a result of trying a whole bunch of different brands, and I really loved how they felt. And when I did this art challenge with these pencils, I really wanted to know what it would look like if I did the exact same piece using the expensive ones. But before we jump to that, I'm going to do a few different tests just so you can directly compare them pencil to pencil. For my first direct comparison, I used the black pencil to create a gradient from the outside edges of a circle to a faded inner area of the circle. I try and make the outside edges of the gradient as strong and bold as I possibly can, and as you can see with the cheap pencil, it struggles to get the lead actually down on the paper. I have the opposite problem with the expensive pencil, where the lead is so malleable and soft it goes on the paper without me really putting much effort into it. So I start off by very, very lightly creating my gradient and then slowly coming back to add some darkness to the outer edges. As you can see, the contrast between the results in this comparison is pretty stark. For my next little test, I create another gradient from one color going into a gradient from another. So I start off with blue on the left side and gradient into an orange or golden yellow on the right. The faded part of the gradients cross over in the middle and should blend to create a bit of a mix between the two colors, touching in on a green spectrum but mostly fading in and transitioning between the two tones. It's a pretty seamless transition with the cheap pencils, but again, it's difficult to get them to blend in the middle. With the expensive pencils, once again, we get some really strong bold colors, and the blending in the middle is much nicer. You can see you can actually get the color to go down and on top of other color that you've already drawn, which is one of the most important aspects of the blending of the pencils. Next, I did a little bit of a saturation test where inside a small circle I draw with a red cheap pencil first, pressing as firmly and creating as flat and solid a color as possible. Once again, the result when compared to my expensive pencils obviously speaks for itself. For my final test, I play with a few comparable colors on what is called mid-tone paper. This is where you have paper that's sort of a mid-brown tone as opposed to a pure white. And of course, as you would have expected, the colors of the cheap pencils are much harder to get to show on this mid-tone paper as opposed to the expensive pencils. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about the benefits of using mid-tone paper for illustration, make sure to check out Will Terrell's channel. I'll put a link into a search term in the description so you can see the videos he's done on mid-tone drawing. Suffice it to say that essentially if you're drawing characters on mid-tone paper, you don't have to work as hard to get the saturation of skin or hair and things like that because it's already got that brown tone. So it's cool in a few ways. You save on your materials because you're not trying to work as hard to get those natural mid-tone saturations. It's also a funky sort of naturalistic aesthetic for a sketchbook, and of course the whites and lighter colors really pop out in a way that they don't really on white paper. So with our little tests out of the way and a pretty clear idea as to where these pencils stand in their capabilities, it's time to attempt to recreate the challenge piece I worked on recently. But this time I'll be using a brand of pencils so fancy I can't even pronounce them. Luminance caran dache. Caran dache. This time I'll be using the luminance caran dache. So jumping straight into it, I start off by creating a really plain flat area of color for the grass, which I'll come in and add some gradients and tone variation to later. The first thing I noticed when filling full color in on this piece compared to the other time that I did this piece is the way I hold the pencil, in particular when filling in broader areas of color as flat as possible, is quite back on the pencil, and it's really useful having that full length pencil to really lightly fill in the areas with broad strokes and rapid motion. Once I finished a single layer in a light green, I go over again, this time in different directions just to make sure that the pencil stroke directions don't show very clearly, and then to fill in all the little nooks and crannies in the path area where the grass is also going to be. The next stage is where the fancy pencils really shine, in particular the mixing of colours, mixing in a bit of a golden green, and then of course going back to my mid-tone green and then a darker green to create some gradients in the green areas of the piece to really help bring out the contrast and to really vary the tone in the illustration, which adds a lot of interest and a lot of appeal. Simply put, this is the major difference between the cheap and the expensive pencils. The colours mix and they lay on top of each other really well, and you can create much smoother tones and blends of colours and gradients than you can with cheap pencils. The wood of the tree is a shining example of this, where in the cheap variation of the piece, I was forced to use all of my resources just to try and come up with a brown with the limited colour palette I had available. However, because with my fancy pencils, aside from them being good at blending, I also have a wider variety of colour, so I started off with a slightly desaturated mid-tone brown, then I worked in some highlights in a much more golden brown, and then my shadows and darker areas with a much warmer, almost maroon toned brown pencil, really rich sort of mahogany look. All of these tonal variations used in conjunction with one another and blended together add a lot of visual interest and appeal to the piece, much more so than it would be if it was just done with a flat brown. And as you can see when doing the same thing on the roof of the house, it's the fact that these pencils blend so well with each other and create such a rich level of saturation that makes them more useful and versatile than cheap pencils. The door is another very clear example of this, where it wasn't difficult to create a very rich red door, where in the other piece that was quite a struggle. Colouring in the stonework of the little cottage was also much more straightforward, where in the other piece I used a black pencil and just worked on it very lightly. When you're working with a grey pencil, you can put down much more lead, which ends with a result that looks more solid and clean. And then also because the lead is more malleable, I can go in and add some shadows under the roof and in the interconnecting areas of the brickwork. The smaller details of the piece, from the saturation of the roses to the gradients in the stones on the ground, have much more impact and are much more effective when coloured in using these fancy pencils. And then last but certainly not least, colouring in the sky was a really fun process. I could get a much stronger level of saturation. So the sunset had a lot more impact, going from the golden horizon all the way to a really rich, deep, dark blue sky up in the top. And then because the colours go down easily and blend well together, adding little highlights like gold or orange on the edge of the cabin stand out a lot more and are much more effective. Okay, it's time for the grand reveal. This, again, is the piece that I did with the crappy pencils, and this is the piece that I did with my non-crappy pencils. I know what you're thinking, yeah, Jazza, we're really surprised that the $0 pencils aren't as rich and beautiful and colourful as the fancy pencils. Obviously you weren't in for a surprise in this video. They are way more capable and you can get so much more saturation and colour. They mix really well and the textures are just gorgeous. The point of this video wasn't to surprise you, it was really just to compare. I was just curious. And here they both are under the exact same light, directly next to each other, and with the exact same creation approach. I wanted to make the same thing. But it is worth noting though that even though the $0 pencils don't get the same effect as the fancy schmancy Swiss pencils I bought in France, it still got a nice effect, and I gotta say it holds up. It's actually not that bad. Some might actually prefer the image on the left done with the cheap pencils because it has a soft pastel sort of feel, a really nice aesthetic that could be quite appealing for some approaches. And then of course the expensive pencils would be more appropriate and more powerful for lots of different things, in particular fine arts or getting very near reproductions of a specific piece of art. So in our cheap pencils challenge, the moral of the story was you don't need a lot of money and stuff to make pretty art. I guess the moral of this video is it's nice to have more tools to your disposal, but art is art, and at the end of the day, fun with art is just as important as the tools you use to create art with. Anyways, that's it for this video. Before I go, I just want to plug Bailey J's shop one more time. That's where I got the picture that you saw in this video. If you go to her website, baileyj.com, you can see she has a coloring page with all of these free coloring images that you can take and practice and have fun with, and she has a shop and a bio and artwork and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. So check her out. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and maybe leave a comment with a suggestion for a different comparison head-to-head sort of video you might be interested in. Thanks for watching, ladies and gentlemen, and until next time, I'll see you later. Make sure to subscribe to my channel to see more of my videos. And while you're at it, check out my shop where I sell ebooks, brushes, photo references, video courses, and more. There's another video you might enjoy from my channel over there, and you can also check out my behind the scenes daily vlog channel, Daily Jazza. That's it for now, and until next time, I'll see you later.